So, Endgame's out. I'm gonna rank all the Marvel movies. Let's do it. Number 22 is The Incredible Hulk. Well, this movie definitely has some notable good points in it, including Edward Norton's surprisingly good performance as Bruce Banner, and William Hurt's okay performance as General Ross. It does have way too many low points, including bad acting from the main antagonist, as well as Liv Tyler. Really not good CGI. And a story that overall it bored me. And while some of the music and action were decent, overall this is just a movie that I didn't find exciting, and it especially doesn't help that it's so different from the rest of the MCU, and it doesn't have the witty, fun charm of the rest of the series. At number 21 is Thor: The Dark World. This movie has some pretty good performances, some great music, and some cool action scenes. Especially shout out to Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth, who did a really good job in their roles. But it's also plagued by a boring side cast of characters, along with the unbearable interns, a completely boring villain who doesn't interest you whatsoever. I will say that the villain in this movie, Malekith, is most likely the most boring villain, the worst villain in the entire series, in my opinion. And it does have good music, and then it has some pretty good special effects and some decent action scenes, but the overall plot is uninteresting and forgettable. There's nothing too great about this movie, but as I said before, great action and casting, and overall there are some fun moments in the movie. At number 20, we have Doctor Strange. This movie has a story, while good, doesn't interest me whatsoever. It has some fun moments, like with Doctor Strange training, and Benedict Cumberbatch was a great casting for the character, especially moving on later in the series. But as of this point in the franchise, the Doctor Strange character wasn't that interesting, although he was a lot better later in the movie than he was in the beginning. It had some good music and some interesting side characters like Wong and Mordo, but as of many Marvel movies, the villain was forgettable, and some of the action was just basic. But probably the high point of the movie would be its special effects, as they're Inception-level insane moments. It also has some pretty good music. At number 19 is Captain Marvel. Well, I definitely enjoyed this movie, and it has a lot of the fun charm of the rest of the MCU. It does suffer from many bad points. Samuel L. Jackson is a fun actor in this movie. There's some great jokes, great action, and Goose the Cat is a fun character. And I also love the story with the Skrulls. But a low point in this movie would be Brie Larson doesn't do a very good job of playing Captain Marvel. She's just kind of condescending, is probably the best way I could describe her character. She's not extremely likable. And then the main villains of this movie aren't insanely interesting. But there is a cool twist that I like. The effects are mostly good until you get to the final battle, when it just seems like a video game. And overall, this movie, while I did have fun with it, just doesn't stack up to some of the other movies in the franchise. At number 18, we have Iron Man 2. I definitely had fun watching this movie. I enjoyed it the whole time. Of course, the main point of that being Robert Downey Jr.'s extremely fun Tony Stark. He got some great funny lines in the movie, and there's some pretty good action scenes. I think this movie has a better final fight than the last film. Gwyneth Paltrow and Don Cheadle do pretty good in their roles. They have great banter with Robert Downey Jr., although I will say this is definitely Don Cheadle's worst performance, as he gets better as he goes on, but this is probably the low point for him. Scarlett Johansson and Samuel L. Jackson are fun in their roles. They do a decent job setting up Avengers. But overall, probably the movie's biggest low point are there too many plot lines, a lack of action in many scenes, and uninteresting villains, except for Justin Hammer, who I really liked, but I did not enjoy Whiplash. Overall, it's a fun movie, but it, just like Captain Marvel, does not stack up to the rest. At number 17 on the list is Thor. Well, this is definitely a fun movie. It's got some great jokes, and overall funny scenes. There isn't much to it. There's a real Shakespearean feel to it, which I really enjoyed. Once again, Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston had great performances. And it had some pretty cool visuals, and they did a great job adapting Asgard to the big screen. But with some basic music, some pretty interesting side characters, and a not so interesting villain, it suffers from a lot of the problems of Phase 1 and some of the worst Marvel movies. but I definitely had a fun time watching it, and it was an enjoyable film. Number 16, we have Iron Man 3. Now, I'm surprised I put this movie this low on my list, because overall, I extremely enjoy it. It's a fun film with some great action scenes, and yet another witty and fun performance by Robert Downey Jr. Probably one of his best performances in the entire Iron Man franchise. He has a great dynamic with Pepper Potts and the kid from Tennessee. Don Cheadle manages to come back and pull off a great performance as War Machine, and he's really fun in this movie. The music is really underrated, and I quite enjoy it. The movie does have a bit of a villain problem, as Guy Pearce, you wouldn't really think of him as a superhero villain, and he doesn't do an amazing job, but Ben Kingsley as the Mandarin is terrifying at times, and actually quite funny at times, and I really like him in this movie. The movie's fun, it's enjoyable, and I definitely have a blast watching it. Well, its main plot isn't super interesting. It's fun, and I like it. Number 15 on my list, we have Ant-Man. This is definitely a fun movie. It has some pretty cool action scenes, some interesting little dynamics when Ant-Man's little, and then Paul Rudd is extremely fun as Scott Lang. He managed to pull off a funny, charismatic, and emotional performance, and I can't think of anyone better as Ant-Man. Michael Douglas does pretty good in his role, too. Evangeline Lilly, she does a good job acting, although her character isn't super likable in this movie. She does have some pretty emotional scenes, which I enjoy. As I've said, with a lot of these, villain problem, as Yellow Jacket is not a super fun villain. He has really no motivation for becoming evil. But this movie is fun, it has great music, and I really enjoyed it the first time I watched it. It was the first Marvel movie I saw in theaters. I really like this movie, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone. At number 14, we have the sequel, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Well, this has just as many pros as the original. It does have a few cons as well. Well, the jokes are funnier, and this definitely has a bit of a stronger plot. This movie becomes less and less rewatchable the more you see it. As I loved the movie when I first saw it in theaters, but I find it a little less likable every time I see it. The villain problem, once again, the villains aren't super interesting, but they do have some good stories, and one of the main villains is actually kind of funny. Michelle Pfeiffer is Janet Van Dyne, fun casting, but once again, more killer lines from Paul Rudd. He did really good in this role. And number 13 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I love this movie. It's fun, it's charming, there's just as many fun jokes and great songs as the original Guardians. Once again, great performances from the cast. I think bringing Kurt Russell as Ego was a great move, as he was extremely fun and charming in this role, and probably the first good villain on this list. The reason I probably put this low is that in the grand scheme of the MCU, it's not super important. You could probably skip this movie if you're just watching the entire thing and only the essentials. It's kind of skippable. But overall, it's still a fun adventure. I would recommend it to anyone, and I have a blast watching it every time. It's extremely rewatchable. Not many problems with this one. At number 12, we have the original Iron Man. Now, this is the movie that started it all, and I can't think of any better way to start it. We got the start of Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as Tony Stark, which set the bar for the rest of the charisma of the MCU. I'm not going to talk too much about this movie, as I've already reviewed it, so if you want to hear more about it, just check out that review. Overall, it has a fun plot. Jeff Bridges is not a super interesting villain, but he definitely has his moments. Terrence Howard, Gwyneth Paltrow, pretty good. And it has some great opening sequence. At number 11, we have Black Panther. Now, this is a very important movie when it comes to cultural significance. It does a great job making the first African-American superhero movie. Sorry, Blade, but you're not really I don't know. It has a great story about a king and his kingdom. It's kind of like The Lion King. But overall, it's still a fun movie with some great action scenes, great performances by Chadwick Boseman, an amazing villain in Eric Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan, fun side characters like Okoye and Shuri, and a really good musical score. This is a fun film. Well, it's probably one of the better ones in the MCU. They're just movies that I enjoy more than it, but it is a great film. At number 10, we have Age of Ultron. And while this movie is probably in the lower half when it comes to story-wise, this is one of my favorite movies just because I enjoy it so much. You can't not have fun watching this movie. It has some great scenes, especially the opening scene. More great performances by the rest of the cast, especially Evans, Hemsworth, and Downey. There were a lot of great scenes between them, great dynamic. The Avengers just have so many great lines. They're charismatic, and this movie has a lot of great action scenes. I love the party scene. Ultron is actually a scary villain who they gave many good lines. I think his main problem, of course, is a lot of jokes. I love how they expand on Hawkeye. While this movie doesn't have a great story, I just have a blast watching it. Number 9 on my list, we have Captain America, the First Avenger. Now, this film doesn't have an amazing second half. Once again, villain problem with the Red Skull, who isn't super interesting. But the first half of this film is just so amazingly good that I had to put this film up so high. Everything from the end of the opening scene to Captain America freeing everybody was just a blast. I'm seeing Steve Rogers constantly being rejected, eventually being accepted, mindlessly, like without thought, sacrificing himself for everybody. Great dynamic between him and Peggy. His stage shows were great, and I loved his first prison break scene. And while the second half, it definitely has some interesting action sequences, it just isn't as fun as the first half. But the scene where Cap sacrifices himself and the ending scene of this movie are amazing. And Chris Evans pulls off a really good performance as Cap. And this movie also has really, really good music. Probably some of the best in the MCU, up there with Black Panther and the Avengers. Number 8 is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. For a while, this is one of the movies that I thought was really overrated. But watching it again, I can see why so many people love it so much. It's a great kind of spy thriller, but it's also an extremely fun superhero movie. Got some great action scenes. Once again, great performance by Chris Evans. Anthony Mackie's fun as the Falcon. Scarlett Johansson's fun in this role. Robert Redford's actually a pretty good villain in this movie. And then the big twist with S.H.I.E.L.D. is extremely unexpected and quite fun. The Winter Soldier is a pretty good villain. He has shares some great scenes with Captain America. And this is just a fun movie with probably the start of what begins Captain America's big push to become one of the best characters in the series. At number 7, we have the original Avengers. While I don't enjoy this as much of Age of Ultron, trust me, I love this movie. I do have more fun watching that, but I had to put this higher just because it's so significant to the universe. It has some great jokes, and this is the start of the great dynamic between all the Avengers. Some amazingly fun action sequences, and it actually starts a lot of superhero movie tropes that Marvel doesn't really continue with. Got some great special effects, great performances. If I had to state a problem, I would be that probably my main problem would be that the government is kind of dumb in this movie. And that, once again, is just a CGI faceless army. But that leads to so many cool scenes that I just have to love this movie. At number 6, we have Thor Ragnarok, what I would call the most rewatchable movie in the entire series. This movie not only has some very interesting scenes, it managed to pull off a great ending to the Thor franchise, unless they make Thor 4. It brings back the great parts of the old movie, such as the beautifulness of Asgard and the charisma of Hiddleston and Hemsworth. And it managed to make a pretty cool villain. But then it also managed to have a cool plot on the alien planet of Cigar, and it goes out as a pretty fun comedy movie. This is definitely the funniest movie in the MCU. Bringing in Jeff Goldblum and Tessa Thompson was absolutely genius. Cate Blanchett was great as Hela. And overall, the best part of this movie is allowing Chris Hemsworth to pull out his comedy chops, and he does a great job here. And Corey is also amazing. At number 5, we have Captain America: Civil War. And while I was having trouble placing this, overall I decided it would best go here, because this is just such a fun movie. The airport scene is probably one of the best battle scenes in the franchise. It was probably the best for a while until Endgame came out, in my opinion. The problem would be that a lot of characters don't really have reasons to disobey the Sokovia Accords, and the reasons for putting them in place are a little unclear at times. But kind of the split tension between Tony and Cap, and a lot of the action scenes are so amazing. It's got a great musical score, and it does a great job introducing Black Panther and Spider-Man to the MCU. This movie is just pure fun. It's hard to not have a good time with it. It has some great moments, some pretty cool twists, and overall, it's definitely the best in the Captain America franchise. At number 4, we have Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a the big risk of the MCU was making this movie because no one really knew who they were beforehand. But Marvel made this movie, and it is extremely fun. It has some great music. The casting of Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Bradley Cooper, Vin Diesel, Dave Bautista. Perfect casting for the Guardians. I couldn't imagine anyone better. They managed to take a tree and talking raccoon and make them likable characters. Drax's lack of understanding sarcasm just leads for some great joking opportunities. Chris Pratt is fun as ever. Zoe Saldana's got a great thing going with Karen Gillan's Nebula. It's got some great action scenes, amazing music, and it's really funny. And overall, it's one of the best movies in the MCU just for the risk it take and the great payoff. And number 3 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I loved this movie when it first came out, and I still love it now. Not as much as I did back when I first saw it, but it's still an extremely fun movie. It's extremely relatable with a lot of the high school scenes. Peter Parker comes off as one of the best characters in the MCU. And while he does get a little annoying at times in this movie, I overall still have a great time with him, as Spider-Man is one of my favorite superheroes. Probably tied with Cap for my favorite. It's funny. It's got some great lines. A lot of the high school stuff is relatable, and it's cool to see this world from the perspective of a kid, of a high schooler. There's some great action scenes, pretty decent music, and Michael Keaton is top tier when it comes to villains in the MCU. Number 2 on this list, we have Avengers Infinity War. This was groundbreaking when it came out. The biggest crossover of all time, in many opinions. It managed to take all of these characters from all of these movies and mash them together into one, and they did it near perfect. There were some great combinations that you really wouldn't expect that ended up being amazing, like Thor and the Guardians, or Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. They just pull off so many cool and fun moments. Thanos is the best villain in the MCU, in my opinion. They do a great job doing the story for him here. He has some great scenes, and overall, his villain plan kind of, not extremely, but it's kind of understandable. Once again, Robert Downey Jr. comes back and takes the stage for the Avengers films. This movie shows that it's not afraid to take risks. It was the darkest movie in the MCU for a long time, but it's still fun, and it has some of the best music out of the franchise, and some great action scenes and special effects. My only grievances would be a lack of screen time for Captain America, and his reunion with Bucky was just too short in my opinion. But overall, I loved this movie when it first came out, and I still love it now. At number 1 on my ranking, I have one on my list, I have Avengers Endgame. I had extremely high expectations for this movie, and it did not disappoint. It delivered some of the best action scenes, emotional scenes, and just overall great moments in the MCU. It's extremely funny. There are some great character combos with Ant-Man. War Machine and Nebula were actually funny together. You wouldn't expect that. War Machine got some great lines. But overall, it pulls off a great concluding story to everything in the MCU so far. I actually was crying during this film, which rarely ever happens in a movie. I think this is the first time I can actually recall crying so hard in the movie theater. It's fun, it's entertaining, Thanos comes back, and it pulls off great, amazing performances by Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans. I would recommend this to absolutely anybody, and it is the great way to end the current phase of the MCU. Anyway, that definitely took a lot out of me, but I hope you guys liked the video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I just want to say that some of my upcoming videos, I don't know too much about what's coming in May, but I can confirm another Smuggler's Bounty unboxing. There's going to be a Detective Pikachu review and a Jaws review, although that's all I can confirm. Aladdin's a high possibility, it just depends on when I see it. But just know there's definitely more content coming in May. I hope you guys liked the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, maybe comment, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.